Hi, friends. Welcome again to UU at Home. Nico and I are going to have a conversation today just about holiday traditions. I'm sure you all have lots of holiday traditions, and we'd love to hear from you. But first, Nico, do you have any favorite holiday traditions?
Yeah, I think my family was pretty straightforward with our traditions. We had sort of special movies that we watch on holidays, special food that we eat. I think on Christmas we had meatloaf, and on Easter we had enchiladas, or vice versa. I can't quite remember. Um, and then on New Year's Eve we watch Ice Age. And so these are like, for as long as I can remember, this is how it has been. And yeah, it feels very straightforward, but very special and something that I still do. Now my family lives kind of several different locations, but it's still something that my sister in particular brings up every single year, to just check in, like, hey, are we still doing that this year? Is this still, when are we going to have time to sit down and watch Ice Age together? It's yeah, it's wonderful.
That's really sweet. I love that. When I was growing up, like Christmas for us was sort of like we called it the holiday shuffle. So like Christmas Eve was always spent with my dad's family. So we'd drive to my grandparents' house, and we would do Christmas Eve in church and Swedish meatballs and lefse there. And then Christmas Day, we would sort of like do our like pancake breakfast and opening presents at my house. And then we would drive to my other grandparents' house and do Christmas dinner there, which was like ham and mashed potatoes and stuff like that. So that was like growing up. So then like when my grandparents passed away, we didn't really have like our own little family tradition quite as much. But one thing that we started doing in my own little family is every year around solstice, what we decided is that we would just kind of like lean into the darkness, put away all electronics, not turn on any lights. And so when it got dark out, we would just light candles. And of course, we just did this and play board games and have a big fancy meal together by candlelight. And that's been a really, really lovely tradition. And every year I always wonder, like, is this the year that the kids insist on having like video games or watch a movie or something? But even on the years where we've had a little bit of resistance, usually by the end, they're like, we need to do this more often. So yeah, that's become a really fun tradition in my family.
Yeah, we're talking about sort of what's been the fun traditions, but obviously, I mean, I don't even need to say that this year was really, really different. And so I feel like it's sort of that uh, we're being forced to figure out what we love about these traditions and what we're going to bring forward with us, what's possible even to bring forward with us, and having kind of really complicated feelings about it, to maybe some relief about certain traditions, and some very, very real, very, very deep sadness about leaving other ones behind.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like holidays are complicated anyway, right? Like even having like these lovely memories of like holidays past. I like the Christmas shuffle was like super stressful, right? There was always complicated stuff around holidays and stuff like that. And I know that that was something that my parents wrestled with a lot, was like doing all of this driving, being all of the places all of the time was so stressful. Is that something we want to keep up? And that was, I think, always a conversation. And as you said, like right now, I think, we're holding these things like sort of in tension, right? As Unitarian Universalists, I know that there are plenty of folks who kind of live with that tension of like, what is my place in this holiday? Maybe it doesn't quite feel like it's my own. Um, and there's, and now it's like, can we do our traditions safely is added into the mix? Or how do I respond to pressure from family members to do things that I don't quite feel comfortable with this year? It's a lot to hold on to this year. A lot of stress sort of added into like the nostalgia and joy and loveliness. It's a lot to hold.
Yeah, yep. And it is painful in a lot of ways. And I also think that, again, it's kind of making us get to the root of what we want to hold here. I know that my family exchanges a lot of gifts this time of year, and this year it was kind of like, what do you want for Christmas? And everyone kind of sent back, I really don't know. Because in some ways it's really hard to think about uh, physical gifts when all we really, really want to do is be able to sit at the same table and share food together and hug each other and things like that. It's hard to hold both of those things. And like you said, it's a complicated time already. And yeah, I hope that the way that we hold traditions going forward is guided and intentional, um, and the way that we set things aside is also guided and intentional.
Yeah. Even just like meal planning at the beginning of this week, I like to do a meal plan to help keep my life somewhat in order. And at the beginning of this week, it was sort of like, okay, I came to Thursday, right? Like we have real particular things that we usually do. It was this moment of doing something as simple as a meal plan came down to like, okay, what is it that I hope that we're holding on to this year for this holiday? What is it? What things from Christmases past do I hope we can kind of somehow reimagine and get a taste of this year, even though it's not going to be anything near the same, right? You and I were having this conversation too about like not just this year, but any year that um, folks feel called to make changes to holidays or create holidays of their own, is that it would be really nice if there was like a set of like guiding questions that could help create holiday traditions that were deep and meaningful, that were fulfilling and maybe a little less stressful, and that were really deeply intentional. And we wrestled with those questions a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. It's a that's a hard thing to do, to figure out how can we create a tradition. You know, so many of these come from long stretches of time, from lots and lots of people. And so for us to sit down and try and answer this is really challenging. But I think you suggested three of them earlier that maybe are a starting point, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, so like we kind of like danced around a few different questions, and we kept coming back to things like having like humility and stuff like that as you're sort of like entering into this process of reimagining and being intentional. And was reminded of Leo Tolstoy's story, The Three Questions. There's also a children's book by the same name that was reimagined by John Muth. And so the three questions are: who is the most important one? When is the most important time? And what is the right thing to do? And those three questions have been so helpful for so many different things that we've wrestled with. And I think that it oddly fits here too, when we're sort of imagining who is the most important one, when is the right time, what is the right thing to do. I think could be a really helpful framework as we're thinking about what traditions we're called to uphold or change or set down. Yeah, what do you think?
yeah, definitely. And I think that again, it's a starting point and a guide. I think particularly like, what is the right thing to do? Thinking of the intention of this tradition. You know, am I doing this because it's nostalgic, and recognizing that maybe it's a little problematic or stressful, but it's nostalgic, so I continue to do it, or am I doing it because there's a need that's being met? There's a need, a connection, a spiritual need, something else that I want to take forward with me. Really asking that question in a way that I know I haven't really interrogated my traditions in that way before.
Yeah. And I think the other word I keep coming back to too is centering, wondering what is it that's being centered in this tradition here. And I think that I think that often traditions can start centered, right? Like it can center family getting together, or center a story, or center, I don't know, certain beliefs or whatever. But I think they often start that way, as centered. But I think we get distracted, right? And suddenly we're kind of pulled away, we're pulled off focus, and we sometimes need to do that work of pulling back in and focus and remember, what was it really about this particular day, this particular tradition that I feel called to or pulled to, and having just that moment of reflection, which I know is so hard this year when we're just so stressed,
Mhm.
but also just giving yourself permission to just set it down, right? To set down the things that just aren't serving you, that aren't serving the world, and just laying it down.
Mhm. I think, we've talked about thresholds before, and so that other question of when is the right time, um, not only having the sort of previous traditions that are left and the ones that we bring ahead, so that sort of threshold, but also having, like the solstice, which is another threshold, or New Year's Eve, which is a threshold between years. And so thinking of those kinds of traditions, like when even does it make sense for me to have this special practice or this special day? And what is it leading me into? What sort of intention is that setting? So not just, what pick a date on the calendar, but really being intentional about um, of what that means, and again, exactly what you said, leaving some things behind, setting them down, but not just throwing them away. You can't just take a tradition that's been meaningful in some kind of way, even if it is simply only nostalgia, and just throw it away and expect that to feel right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think yeah, I love what you're saying about, the most important time too in thresholds. And I think, we make up a lot of our own thresholds, right? A lot of them are at some point in time made up, but a lot of our work as a religious community is naming and marking thresholds. So rites of passage. I've heard of families who have a special ritual around losing teeth. Of course, there's like the tooth fairy comes, but some people have other traditions that they do um, as well. And I think that making those moments to name thresholds, to name rites of passage, can be really lovely and really important uh, to families.
Mhm, mhm.
And I think that last question, what is the right thing? What was the last question? Yeah, so it's who's the most important one, when is the right time, and what is the right thing to do? And I think that's so tied up with those first two questions, right? Because again, we bring our Unitarian Universalism into this practice of tradition, right? Which means we bring covenant into the question too. So if our practices are not bringing us into right relationship with our communities and with the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part, then I think it's time to examine them. And I think that's definitely work I could do, right? When I'm thinking about my traditions, how are these traditions calling me into right relationship or bringing me into right relationship? I think my hard answer to that is that they don't always.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and there can be a whole grieving process along with that. Um, yeah, because again, it's possible to recognize that this is not something I want to take forward with me, and it was a huge part of my life for a long time, and so I'm feeling really sad in some really weird, complicated ways about leaving it behind.
Yeah. I think what would be helpful is to, gosh, we could create our own ritual or tradition around just this work of letting down or setting down and leaving behind the things that we know aren't really helpful to us, or the things that, quite frankly, we really miss and we really want to get back to, and we just can't hold them this year, because we know what we're prioritizing maybe is health or safety. So
Mhm.
I think let's offer some blessings. I'm going to start by offering a blessing just to all of you out there who maybe are wrestling with what is the right thing to do right now, as you wonder whether to stick to traditions or to prioritize something else in this hard year.
And I'll offer a blessing for those of you who are grieving, being it the complicated grief of loved ones or the grief of not being able to be physically together, the grief of traditions that are being left behind.
I'd like to offer a blessing to those who've sort of always struggled this holiday season with feeling out of place and are holding that anxiety in a new way this year.
I'll offer a blessing for the traditions that we are bringing forward with us, maybe not in the same shape and way that they were before, but those traditions that we do hold dear.
I'd like to offer a blessing, just as we often do, offer a blessing to those who need a blessing, who maybe haven't received one. Well, thank you all for being with us today. We'd love to hear more from all of you about your traditions that you're holding on to, or traditions maybe that you're leaving behind. Feel free to leave something in the comments for us, send us a message, let us know how you're doing. Happy holidays, everybody.